This show is part of OnePlace, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to our daily crime roundup. We have a heavy slate of legal updates and breaking investigations to cover today, ranging from tragic accidents to cold case breakthroughs. Let's get started.
An OnlyFans model pleads guilty after a client's death.
A woman allegedly killed a man after a catfish reveal.
A teen's defense seeks dismissal over a leaked confession.
Prosecutors seek the death penalty for a Florida roommate.
A Virginia mother faces charges for drowning her twins.
New evidence of human remains found in Kristen Smart case.
Missouri parents arrested after skeletal remains found in yard.
A husband's intruder story falls apart after ring footage.
Starting with our first story. In a case that highlights the extreme risks of unregulated fetish work, OnlyFans model Michaela Rylarsdam has pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. This follows the tragic death of 55-year-old Michael Dale during a kinky sex session in April 2023. Dale had reportedly agreed to pay Rylarsdam $11,000 for a session that involved being wrapped in plastic like a mummy and having his eyes glued shut with Gorilla Glue. While Rylarsdam was initially facing a second-degree murder charge, she reached a plea deal with San Diego prosecutors. She is now expected to serve 4 years in prison. The details of the encounter are truly harrowing, as investigators found videos showing Dale fully encased in plastic with a bag over his head, which ultimately led to his death by asphyxiation.
The investigation revealed that the session went far beyond what Dale had actually requested. While he did ask for his eyes to be sealed and to be wrapped in plastic, there was no evidence he ever consented to having a plastic bag placed over his head. In fact, a roommate testified that he heard Dale asking Rylarsdam to stop and even offering her more money to end the session. Despite these pleas, the medical examiner concluded the bag remained on his head for at least 8 minutes. Rylarsdam did eventually call 911 when Dale lost consciousness, but he passed away the following day at the hospital. This case serves as a grim reminder of how quickly these high-risk encounters can turn fatal when safety protocols and clear boundaries are ignored by the provider.
Now let's shift to... In Phoenix, Arizona, a meeting between two people who met on a dating app turned into a deadly hit-and-run. 30-year-old Michaela Andressa Baje is now facing second-degree murder charges after she allegedly ran over 52-year-old Norris Taft. The two had met on an app called MocoSpace and agreed to meet at a donut shop. However, the date quickly soured when Taft realized that Baje did not look like the photos she had used online. Taft reportedly texted his nephew, explaining that he had been catfished and was attempting to end the date or take the woman back to her home. Surveillance footage from an apartment complex later captured the horrific moment when Taft stood in front of Baje's SUV, signaling for her to stop, only for her to accelerate and drag him under the vehicle.
The footage is a key piece of evidence for the Phoenix Police Department, as it shows the SUV striking Taft, dragging him, and then exiting the parking lot without stopping to render aid. Taft was rushed to a nearby hospital, but unfortunately succumbed to his injuries shortly after arrival. Investigators were able to identify Baje through additional security footage and the digital trail left by their dating app interactions. Beyond the murder charge, she is also accused of theft of a means of transportation and failing to remain at the scene of a fatal accident. It is a chilling example of how a simple disagreement over a dating profile can escalate into a violent and senseless loss of life. Baje remains in custody as the legal process moves forward in the Grand Canyon state.
Next up, a complex legal battle is unfolding in Florida, involving 17-year-old Jasper Egler, who is accused of murdering his mother and her boyfriend. Egler's defense attorney is now pushing for the entire case to be dismissed, arguing that the Palm Bay Police Department violated the law by releasing video of the teen's confession to the media. The defense claims that under Florida law, a suspect's confession is exempt from public disclosure, especially when it involves a minor. The release of the video led to widespread media coverage, which the defense argues has irrevocably tainted the potential jury pool and violated Egler's privacy. The attorney specifically pointed out that the public disclosure of Egler's transgender identity and personal household tensions has created a level of publicity that shocks the conscience and makes a fair trial impossible in the adult court system.
On the other side, the prosecution maintains that there was no error in releasing the recordings. Assistant State Attorney Carrie Fowler argued that because Egler is being charged as an adult, he is treated as an adult under the law, and no motion had been filed to seal the evidence. The case itself is tragic, with Egler allegedly calling 911 to report an intruder while failing to mention the bodies of Kelly McCollum and Matthew Shanerock inside the home. Detectives say Egler eventually admitted to shooting the victims as they walked through the front door. While the released video was partially redacted, the defense insists the damage is done. The judge now has to decide if the procedural misstep is significant enough to warrant dismissing the charges or moving the case back to the juvenile system, where the penalties would be much less severe.
Moving on to... In another major Florida case, prosecutors in Tampa have announced they will seek the death penalty for Hisham Abougarbieh. The 26-year-old is accused of the brutal murders of two University of South Florida graduate students, Zamil Limon and Nahida Bristi. The victims, who were both from Bangladesh, disappeared in mid-April, and their bodies were later discovered in trash bags dumped near the Howard Franklin Bridge. Prosecutors are citing three specific aggravating factors to justify the death penalty: the heinous and cruel nature of the crime, the fact that it was cold and calculated, and Abougarbieh's prior felony conviction. This decision marks a significant escalation in the case, reflecting the severity of the allegations and the calculated manner in which the state believes the murders were carried out, and the bodies were disposed of.
While Abougarbieh has denied any involvement in the killings, investigators have pointed to a trail of digital evidence that they say links him directly to the crime. This includes search history for sniper bullets, guns, and information on missing adults. Interestingly, the sheriff noted that while the defendant didn't have a long criminal record, he did have a history of erratic behavior that had previously caused concern among other students. Some had even requested that he be moved out of his residence before the murders occurred. The loss of two promising graduate students has deeply impacted the USF community and the local Bangladeshi population. As the case moves toward an arraignment later this month, the focus will be on the evidence the state has gathered to prove that these murders were indeed premeditated and without any moral justification.
Now let's look at a heartbreaking case out of Richmond, Virginia, has led to the indictment of 21-year-old Amaya Dixon. She is accused of drowning her twin 17-month-old sons in a bathtub last month. Police were called to an apartment on German School Road, where they found the toddler suffering from apparent drowning injuries. One boy died that night, while his brother passed away the following day. A grand jury has now charged Dixon with 2 counts of felony murder and 2 counts of child neglect. This tragedy is compounded by the fact that Dixon was already facing several pending criminal charges in a neighboring county at the time of the incident. Those previous charges included credit card theft, grand larceny, and the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, suggesting a pattern of troubled behavior leading up to the deaths of her children.
The motive for the alleged killings remains unclear, as the Richmond Police Department's Major Crimes Unit continues its investigation. Authorities have been tight-lipped about the specific circumstances inside the apartment that night, including whether anyone else was present when the twins were in the bathtub. The community has been left reeling from the loss of 2 very young lives in such a violent manner. Dixon is currently in custody, and investigators are still urging anyone with information to come forward. The case highlights the critical need for intervention in households where parents may be struggling with legal or personal issues. As the legal process moves forward, the focus will remain on seeking justice for the 2 young boys who never had a chance to grow up, while the court examines Dixon's mental state and history.
Next, we have... There is a major development in the decades-old disappearance of Kristen Smart. Investigators in San Luis Obispo County have announced that a renewed search at a property owned by the mother of convicted killer Paul Flores has yielded evidence consistent with human remains. Kristen Smart vanished in 1996 after an off-campus party, and while Paul Flores was convicted of her murder in 2023, her body has never been found. Sheriff Ian Parkinson stated that while they cannot definitively say the remains belong to Smart yet, the evidence suggests that a human body was either there at one time or is still present. This search was made possible by advancements in technology that allow investigators to identify specific compounds in the soil related to human decomposition, which were not detectable when the property was first searched with radar back in the late 90s.
The commitment to finding Kristen Smart's remains has been a long-term goal for Sheriff Parkinson, who inherited the case years after she disappeared. He has stated that his team will not leave the property until every inch has been thoroughly checked. The original trial established that Flores murdered Smart during an attempted rape, but the lack of physical evidence from the dorm rooms made the case incredibly difficult to prosecute initially. Finding her remains would provide a final sense of closure for the Smart family, who have spent nearly 30 years wondering where their daughter is. This new forensic evidence could be the key to finally bringing her home. As the excavation continues, the community and the nation are watching closely, hoping that this long-standing mystery is finally on the verge of being fully resolved through modern science.
Now shifting to... In a truly disturbing case from Missouri, a couple has been arrested after the skeletal remains of their teenage son were found buried in a shallow grave on their property. Sean and Tamala Asbury are facing charges of second-degree murder, child abuse, and abandonment of a corpse. The investigation began when deputies served a search warrant at their home and found 3 other children living in horrific conditions. One child was found locked in a shed without utilities, bound to a bed, and severely malnourished. The sheriff's office reported that the home had no running water or sewer system, and the children were described as being extremely scared and dirty. Medical professionals even stated that the youngest child was likely only a day or 2 away from death when the authorities finally intervened and rescued them from the residence.
The discovery of the skeletal remains, which are believed to belong to their missing son Cesar, has added a layer of tragedy to an already grim situation. The parents had previously reported the teen as missing, but the investigation suggests a much darker reality. When law enforcement first arrived, Sean Asbury attempted to flee with 2 of the smaller children before being apprehended. The couple now faces a long list of charges, including 8 counts of abuse or neglect of a child. This case has shocked the local community in Piney Township, as the level of neglect and physical restraint described by investigators is extreme. The surviving children are now in protective care, receiving the medical attention they desperately need, while the legal system begins the process of holding the Asburys accountable for the death of one son and the torture of the others.
Finally, we cover a Washington man's elaborate story about a home intruder has been dismantled by investigators using Ring camera footage. Kyle Cathcart claimed that an unknown man broke into his home and stabbed his wife Jody 48 times while he was in the bathroom. He told police he tried to fight the intruder off and was knocked unconscious. However, when detectives reviewed the home's surveillance footage, they found no evidence of anyone entering or leaving the house during the time frame Kyle provided. Instead, the evidence suggests a much more calculated motive. It appears Jody believed Kyle was set to collect a $6 million settlement that very day, a settlement that investigators believe may have been entirely fabricated. Kyle is now facing first-degree murder charges with a deadly weapon enhancement. As the prosecution argues, the attack was a premeditated act by the husband.
The physical evidence at the scene also contradicted Kyle's story. While Jody suffered dozens of fatal stab wounds, Kyle only had superficial scratches and minor swelling, which investigators believe were self-inflicted to support his intruder narrative. A bloody kitchen knife was found in the hallway, and the brutal nature of the crime suggests a high level of personal aggression. The discrepancy between his claims of a violent struggle and his actual injuries was a major red flag for the King County Sheriff's Office. This case highlights how digital forensics, like smart doorbell cameras, are increasingly becoming the undoing of staged crime scenes. Kyle Cathcart remains in custody as the state builds its case, focusing on the financial deception that likely served as the catalyst for this violent outburst. The community is left mourning Jody as the truth behind her death comes to light.
That concludes our roundup for today. Thank you for joining us for these critical updates. Be sure to follow the show for your next daily briefing on the stories that matter most.